I'm standing on the Mount of Olives. It's a beautiful setting, sitting some 2,600 feet above sea level. It gives you this beautiful panoramic view of the entire old city of Jerusalem. This is a significant sight. You could argue one of the most significant as Jesus enters the last week of his life here on earth. There aren't a lot of events that all 4 eyewitness accounts talk about in all 4 Gospels. It's what we now call the triumphal entry. But it didn't just start here. Jesus did most of his ministry around the Sea of Galilee, about 2-hour drive north of here. But Jesus has made his way down south. It's Passover time, and as all Jews did at the time, they made this pilgrimage journey to the city of Jerusalem. And Jesus' disciples, they made that same journey. On foot would have taken them a couple of days. And so Jesus was about 2 miles to the east of here in this little town called Bethany. And while he was there, he gave his disciples some instructions, and he sent 2 of his disciples out. We don't know which 2. Likely it was Peter and John. And they went out to get Jesus a colt and also a donkey. Now that would have been very significant for them at the moment because Jesus had always walked everywhere he went. So the thought that he would ride a donkey into the city of Jerusalem, now that was a significant thing. Now Jesus gave them something to say if somebody were to ask, why he was asking for this donkey. And he was just given the instruction to say, just tell them that the Lord needs this donkey. Now you could take that in a couple ways. Lord back in the ancient world could just refer to the owner of the donkey, but that's likely not what's going on here because Jesus didn't own this little colt. Instead, Lord was most likely a reference to who he was. He's Lord, he's Master, he was one with great authority. And if you think about Jesus, he had grown in such popularity through his ministry, through his teaching, through his miracles. Crowds had gathered around him. He had actually just raised Lazarus from the dead, and that rumor was spreading all throughout. Could he really be the one? And so people were really excited. And so if somebody were to ask, who's this donkey for? And they say, it's for the Lord. Somebody would willingly lend this donkey to allow Jesus as Lord to ride this donkey into the city. But not only was it just a practical mode of transportation, it actually was fulfilling an ancient prophecy, biblical prophecy, to incredible precision. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Written some 500 years before Jesus was coming to the Mount of Olives, it says this. It says, see, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, a foal of a donkey. It's interesting that it was the colt and also as the mom donkey. Likely, very practically, it was because Jesus was going to ride this colt that had never been ridden before. And this young little colt, if it was accompanied by its mom, would be less likely to get it spooked when they went through these massive crowds of people that would have been full of anticipation and exhilaration. This Palestinian peasant, this itinerant preacher and teacher, is starting to look more and more like a king. And Jesus mounts up on this donkey on the Mount of Olives as he's about to enter into the city of Jerusalem. And what we discover is he's exactly who the prophets predicted him to be. But as we'll discover, he was not who the people expected him to be. Now it was Passover. And what that meant is if you were a Jewish person, no matter where you lived, you would make your pilgrimage to Jerusalem. That's where you would celebrate Passover. And so people came by the hundreds, if not by the thousands, to celebrate Passover here. And they came with such excitement, such religious fervor, because God had promised some thousands of years ago that he would send a Messiah, one who would deliver, one who would save his people. And so there was all kinds of excitement that maybe, just maybe, Jesus could be the long-awaited Messiah. And so there's so much anticipation, so much fervor, so much excitement as they see him riding this donkey into the city. Because they were expecting it to not just be a donkey, they were expecting it to be a war horse. You got to understand that just behind me, the building that's now called the Dome of the Rock, that stands on what was the Temple Mount. The temple was this amazing, amazing structure, and it was understood to be the epicenter of God's activity in the world. I mean, it was the political center for the Jewish people. It was also the religious center for everything that was happening. And so Jesus, seen as this political leader, would have come over the Mount of Olives, descending his way to the temple. And the people were thinking, maybe, just maybe, Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. And so with such great anticipation and such great fervor, they lined from the top of the Mount of Olives all the way down to the city gates. People were lined some 3 or 4 people deep. They were welcoming him as king into the city. They would have been, waving palm branches, putting clothes on the ground. They were saying things like, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." Hosanna literally means save us, like God save us. And when they're saying that, they're literally saying it, God save us politically. You see, back in the ancient world, the Jewish people weren't free people. Instead, the Romans had conquered them some few hundred years before, so they lived under great oppression. And so the thought that Jesus might be this incredible political leader that would deliver them from the hands of the Romans brought more excitement than they knew what to do with. And so they followed Jesus all the way down to the city of Jerusalem to welcome him as their king. This is where Jesus did something surprising. The Mount of Olives is now in front of me, and what you would have expected of Jesus when he came off the Mount of Olives, you would have expected him to go to the south side of the city. But instead, he came to the eastern wall through this gate. This gate is now known as the Lion's Gate, but it's been known by a few other names. For a while, it was known as Stephen's Gate because Stephen, the very first martyr of the Christian faith, tradition holds that he was stoned just outside of this gate. But back in Jesus' day, it was actually known by a third name. This was called the Sheep's Gate. Now, the significance of the Sheep's Gate is during Passover season, which again, this was Passover, people would have brought their spotless, unblemished lamb through this gate. It was the place that you would make a sacrifice for the sins of people. Now, Jesus was definitely a victorious king, but what's fascinating about this moment is he's making a statement that his victory was not going to come in a way that you would expect. His victory would come through sacrifice. And though he was certainly victorious, Jesus was not gloating in his victory. You see, Jesus had no doubt won over the popularity of people, but he had not yet won over their hearts. Because he knew that this same crowd that was shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," would be the very same crowd that would yell, "Crucify him," just 5 days from now. And so actually, just when he passed through this gate, what the Bible records is this. It says that Jesus wept. He wept over the city of Jerusalem. You lead into the connotation of what's written in the original language, it actually means that he deeply sobbed. He was overwhelmed with emotion, just sadness for the people because he knew he didn't have their hearts, and he prayed for peace. Not just any peace. He prayed for a shalom type of peace. Sometimes when you and I think about peace, what we think about is the absence of conflict. You and I could have tension with one another and we could choose to not do anything bad to one another, and that would be the absence of conflict. But the type of peace that Jesus prayed for is a shalom type of peace, a sense of wholeness. Because the truth is, if we just don't do anything bad together, I can still have anger, bitterness, rage, frustration in my heart. There's nothing peaceful about my existence. But a shalom type of peace, it brings healing to my heart. It restores things. It renews things. I could truly live at peace. That's the type of peace that Jesus came to bring. That you and I might live with that kind of peace in our relationship with God. We might live with that type of peace in our relationship with others. I mean, what if it's true? I mean, what if this wasn't just a single amazing moment in human history as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords came down the Mount of Olives in a colt? I mean, what if? What if victory came through sacrifice in this king? And what if he came to bring peace so that you and I could be made right with God and made right with one another? What if? What if we made King Jesus the king of our lives today?